Hoş geldiniz. Sempozyumumuzun bugünkü açık oturumlarında 3 tane konu.
Panels of symposium, we try to deal with 3 different topics: security and politics in the morning session, and in the previous session, energy and environmental problems, especially water problem. And in this session, we will be talking about trade and investment opportunities, economic relations between 3 countries. So closed sessions were held yesterday. There were bilateral and trilateral agreements between countries concerning security, politics, economy, environment, and water. These were all delved into by experts in their field. Discussions were grouped and made in detail. So today's sessions were meant to be open so that we could share it with public. That's why we had open sessions today. Maybe we couldn't talk much in detail in these sessions, but at least the problems that the 3 countries face and the possible solutions were some of the issues that were delved into in today's sessions. And after the session, the symposium will come to an end. Now that we will be talking about economy and trade, let me make an introduction, especially concerning Iran. In 8th of May 1812, President Donald Trump's withdrawal from the nuclear treaty came to an end. JPCOA articles have been read over and over. Actually, in this nuclear treaty, the backbone of it was the commitments of the United States. Iran's actually sitting at the table was the United States commitment, and United States withdrawal meant the end of this nuclear treaty. After American withdrawal, there were sanctions implemented, bilateral sanctions, and even though there were certain exemptions, beginning with 5th of March 2019, the exemptions concerning oil import from Iran were started, and there was a serious decrease in trade volume with Iran. And all the macroeconomic factors like unemployment, employment, and currency issues have been on the rise. In such a country where there are many university graduates, if the economy has come to an end almost, and there is around 9%, 9.5% deficit according to IMF figures. It was around 4% last year for Iran. So there's serious unemployment, and there's a serious pressure due to the situation. And remember, in Iraq, after the American operation in Iraq in 2003, Iraq could never really stand on its feet in terms of solving the on people due to war situation. And in such a society where there is population increase at a rapid pace due to the ideological and political reasons, the conglomeration of problems skyrocketed and people went out on the streets. What we say is the stability of these countries are very important. In the first Gulf War, after the first Gulf War, due to military conflict in Iraq, Turkey had big economic losses. Actually, an ambassador yesterday was saying, how do sanctions on Iran have an impact on Turkey? A very negative impact indeed. Similarly, the situation in Iraq is very negative for Turkey as well. We want Iran and Iraq to become more stable so that we can now make money, we can now make trade. We can earn from them, they can earn from us. rather than all these political and security issues. So, having given this background, we have very important, valuable speakers here. So, can we actually activate these trade and investment channels and solve the problems in our countries through these channels as well? So, in order to debate these topics, we have Mr. Mahmoud Dagar. He is the Director General of Financial Operations and Debt Management in the Central Bank of Iraq. We have Mr. Sabah Zangane. He's also a very experienced politician. And we have Mr. Adam Yazıcı from Foreign Affairs Department in the Ministry of Trade. He's also the head of this department. We would like to thank the participants for their participation. Now, it has been customary now, it has been traditional now, that we give the floor to our neighbor Iraq first. Let's start with Mr. Sabah. Okay. So now, I give the floor to Mr. Sabah Zangane. We give around 20 minutes to our guests. Let me read Sabah's CV. Sabah Zangane is actually a political scientist. Interestingly, he graduated from Food Engineering Department, and he had PhD in strategic management. He's an expert in strategic management. He has worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Iran as a consultant for a while. You have the floor, Mr. Sabah Zangane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my thanks to İRAM Center with brilliant directors and nice experts in different fields. My pleasure to be here and to address some items which I think can help in proceeding towards the future. So, as the tradition goes on these 2 days, I will switch to Farsi or Arabic so to have more audience in direct language and to have the emotion in good level. الحقيقة أن الوضع الاقتصادي
The truth is that the economical situation is not just in Iran, but it's in the whole region and in the whole world. And the whole world is going through a very major change in inflation. And the change in powers all over the world and the influential powers all over the world, and the change in the roadmaps, in the economical roadmaps in the future. And this shows in the trials of winning the new markets or giving up the traditional markets, as we see in the petroleum market as a managemental point of economical view all over the last 100 years, specifically in the Middle Eastern region and the Persian Gulf. Now, petroleum became a very secondary aspect of economy in the global economy. That is, as the rise of the U.S. as an oil producer, not as just a consumer. Secondly, the effect and the limited influence of OPEC organization in the global economy that has been, in a certain point of time, it was dedicated, and it was controlling over from 50 to 75% of the global energy market, but now it's limited to only 40%. And the entry of new energy sources from renewables, from the new production of in technology, the modern technology that has a very high efficiency in energy production, and also the new methods in how to regulate and to minimize our usage of energy and our dependency on our energy sources, whether it is petroleum, gas, or even the solar cells. The solar cells and the solar technology is considered a more efficient way to, as it is way than efficient than earlier to produce the energy. And the alternatives are now more available. That's why the effect of the energy producing and the oil producing countries have been limited. This stays for our countries to be maybe it will need 2 decades to transition from currently depending on the exports of oils and petrochemicals to depending on other energy sources, and to get free of the fellowship of the energy producing cycle of giving energy to the West and taking the products back, and to have a new ways and methods to deal with economy and its effect on over the world. And there is a very strong motion of, and a very important one, getting rid of the influence, the absolute influence of the governments that are like petroleum dependent. And that's how it got far from the will of its own populations by reducing the reduction of the prices of the petroleum, by the reduction of the dependency on petroleum, the availability of the alternatives. So the decision making and the policy making is being shifted away from the governments that are dependent on such resources, and will get rid of the absolute dominance of these governments and these regimes on the people's will, and to shift and transition into new systems that are dependent on new sources of new financial sources as taxes or production or services, which will decrease the dominance of the governments and the people on building the future of politics in the region for our people and governments. This is a very important topic, and we're looking forward and we're looking for the beginnings of the changes that are upcoming, the uprisings that are upcoming in our region, and to produce and to result into a more flourishing governments and systems that are taking its legitimacy and dependency from the people and the people's will, other than the governments that are dependent on the resource base. From another perspective, the political situation generally has an effect on the economical situation. The security also have an effect. It has an effect on the political security and the economical security. So politics and finance are intertwined. We cannot depend on solving our solutions just to solve the security issues, because the main drive of most of the changes in the last decade was the fear, or the fear of being invaded, or being dominated by Israel, or being dominated by certain ideologies, nationalism, political parties, extremism. The security factor had a very high priority in how the list of priorities of these governments. But the security cannot be achieved in a very specific region, and it is lacking in some other. That's why the correlation and intertwination between these topics and these elements has to be very strong. It has to be a cultural, heritageal, geographical connection, and it just cannot happen in one country, and it's in neighboring country you have the complete opposite. You have a stability in one and instability in the other. And this the development, and you cannot have economical or political development without having the security issue solved. And you cannot have this country that is living in a welfare state and it is living its welfare system, but the other country is living in poverty. This kind of situations is the reason why the social structure, the security structure of the region falls and fails. The big players in the region right now, Iran, Turkey, and previously Egypt and Saudi, and these players getting into competition is usually very harmful to the smaller neighboring countries, and finding harmony and a good environment for cooperation between these countries will help to come out of the situation of the issues and crises that the region is going on, to move to a better place, as the situation in Iraq right now, and we can bypass a lot of the negative aspects, and we can reach a positive and a stable situation because of the cooperation that is built on mutual benefit, not one-sided benefit without taking in no consideration the other sides. These are the main points that I imagine for this cooperation that can erase a lot of the mistakes that are plaguing these societies and are hurting them, and preventing the foreign influence to destabilize the region. Let's take for an example the energy topic, and take it for the next 20 years between Iran and Iraq, going to Turkey. This energy issue will face two main hurdles: the US hurdle and the Russian hurdle. The US problem from becoming a central center of energy, to be a hub of producing the Iranian gas and petrol to Europe, and the gas in Iran and Iraq, after exporting and mining them, you will find the other hurdle that is coming through Russia. Russia doesn't want and doesn't accept a country like Iran, with even though the good relations between them, doesn't allow that another country to go through to Europe throughout Turkey. And due to these pressures, these foreign pressures from both the US and Russia, is have more presence in the energy market. And as we don't know what is going to happen in the upcoming 20 years in the energy market, which might be completely devalued by then. Okay, so now, what happens if these three countries together, they will be able to benefit from the negative competition between the US and Russia? This can also happen in Syria. Now there is a trilateral work that is done between the three countries, and if Syria was included in this, these four nations can reach stability first, and for Iraq and Syria, a more cooperation to be able to reach the Mediterranean Sea, and Iraq can restore the pipes that were exporting the petroleum to the Mediterranean. 5 minutes left. Okay. With a very positive vision that is built upon mutual benefits, that is Iran, Turkey, Syria and Iraq, they can create a bigger benefit and a bigger concept that they can benefit more from it, that Turkey can build a way more positive relations with Iraq and Syria based on these mutual benefits, which are way more than exchanging of goods, of energy, or food, or trade, or other products. This all can come to one point of a project, of the project of One Belt, One Road, the Chinese project, that is. By the coordination between these countries, they can deal with China as a bigger entity, as a stronger entity, based on the higher benefit and for all of them, as China cannot transport its goods to Europe without passing through this point of, even with sea, coming to the Iranian ports and Iraqi ports, going through the Iranian-Iraqi lands throughout Turkey to Europe. So we need to cooperate. And this project is built on three aspects. We have one problem, which is the production issue. But there is a huge production in China. But China is also going to use the Sri Lankan, Indian, Bangladesh production lines also. And it needs this second trouble to be solved, which is the logistic issue, which is storages and ship. And for the last problem, which is the transportation issue, which is the using aviation, sea, railways, roads, and with the third shipment and the second, the logistics. Turkey and Iran and Iraq can play a huge role, and it can get a huge percentage of the profits that are coming through their lands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zangani, for your valuable comments about Iranian position regarding trade issue. Particularly, he emphasized on the current problems Iran facing, and also he talked about famous Belt and Road Initiative and what does the Belt and Road Initiative might imply for Iran, Turkey, and Iraq. And our second speaker is Mahmoud Dager. Let me read your CV to audience. He's as I am, he's a finance guy. Professor Mahmoud Dager is currently Director General in Financial Operation and Debt Management in Central Bank of Iraq. And he had been the editorial board in Economic Magazine of the Gulf region. And also he's an active member of Arab Association for Economic Research. He published 32 articles, which is wonderful. And also he has 3 books. And he's going to make his presentation by using PowerPoint. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you.
Fuck me. Assalamu alaikum.
From the title, how we transform the challenge to opportunity for the 3 countries. When we start from this title, that's mean we search for economic integration, the possibility of economic integration and the visibility of economic integration between these 3 countries. When we speak about the integration, we must speak in 2 main things, especially in this region. First thing, about the monetary policies, which each country adopt, and second thing, the economic structure in this 3 countries. We will start with the monetary policy. As you know, Turkish followed a floating exchange rate with inflation targeting. Why I start with the exchange rate? Because exchange rate in this 3 countries is the base for monetary policy. So now, as you know, the $1 is equal 5.7 Turkish lira. There are 3 branch of or Turkish bank inside of Iraq and working inside of Iraq. What about Iran exchange rate? Exchange rate in Iran, IMF call it's multiple currency practice. We couldn't recognize precisely. But if we say it is a floating, now each $1 equal 1,000 to 20 something. What you call me? 2 man. Iraq follow or adopt fixed exchange rate because he is a small open country, and many scientists in this field advise the small open country to adopt this type of regime. Now, each $1 in the market, it's fixed and equal 1,200 Iraqi dinar. As you see, there is a big difference between the base of monetary policy. Each one use his currency inside, but relationship with other must have a valve. This valve is exchange rate. That enhance both countries to harmonize its monetary policy to make more enhancing for economic integration. Now, if we go to the economic structure, as you see, this is Turkish. It is a typical structure for diversification. There is agriculture plus industrial covered more than 65% of GDP. Iran also, there is possibility of diversification, but still now it is rental economy. Iraq, it is a typical model for rental, and maybe more than or approach 70% of GDP rise from oil sector. What's that mean? That means there is a good opportunity for Turkish economy to export for the other and to invest. And this potential situation for Turkey must translate to action, how we could export and play win-win game. That's a crucial thing for the three countries. Now, if we turn back to Turkish and Baghdad, as you see, the export official data, the export at 2018 about more than $8 billion, and its rate of growth 5%. And the Turkey export a lot of things to Iraq. What Iraq do? Iraq also export with 1 billion, but it's depend on one good. It's petrol or oil. That's the situation now. And what's Iran? Iran also, it's a strong partner for Iraq economy. As you've seen, export about more than $6 billion officially. And if we measure the unofficially, we will approach $10 billion. Because we have a long border and a good relationship between the two society and government. Iraq, its export to Iran, it's not more $77 million. We have a special agreement with Iran to Iran export electricity and gas to Iraq. And when the sanction imposed from United States on Iranian economy, we always, every 3 months, have exception to still continue use electricity and gas. The size of this import, it's about 4.2 billion. If we added 4.2 billion to 6 billion, as I say, maybe more than a 12 with non-official imports to Iraq. Now, how can I answer the main question sent from the IRAM Center in this session? With our bilateral relationship between Iraq and between Iraq and Iran, the problem, the challenge is no banking system transfer the payment between two countries due to the sanction, American sanction. That's a problem. But although the government of Iraq do its best to continue import of gas and electricity. Okay, now we are transferred to Turkish-Iraqi relationship. There is also a big difficulty, challenge. Number one, the first one, oil export of Kurdistan region without agreement from Baghdad. That's obstacles. We must smoothing. Number two, all trading and cooperation agreement between Kurdistan region and Turkey without approval from Baghdad. And I want to told you we have a group, a big group from Kurdistan now in Baghdad, making bargaining with Iraq, making dialogue with Iraq to smoothing the problem. And we hope we could go more than before. Number three, water issue. And the expert before me spoke about this problem. Okay? In the end, as you see, in Iraq, we import everything from all sides, 360 centigrade. For this reason, what we do, we try to encourage some tariffs and a protection wall against the increasing of import. The problem, if we smooth the problem of differentiation of exchange rate, we have a three system. If we making smooth for this difficult, I think we help Iraq for more imports and more cooperation with a three economy. In the end, thank you, and I hope take a short time from your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dagger. I think the presentation is clear. Although in Center for Iranian Studies, we have undertaken a kind of project to find scenarios, integration between Iraq, Iran, Turkey can be possible. Complementary of production is a must. Like, each country has a complementary production system. There are some problems, but we calculate almost among 1,500 commodities, which sectors are more competitive in Turkey, which sector is more competitive in Iran, and so on and so forth. So we calculate. So if there is a integration between these countries, which sectors are affected negatively, which sectors are affected positively vis-à-vis Turkey, vis-à-vis Iran. So overall, the welfare gain is on the positive side for these two countries. Thank you for your presentation, Professor. And finally, our third speaker is Turkish. So we are the home, actually. That is why we keep him the last speaker. Adem Yazıcı is the working for Turkish Minister of Foreign Trade. He graduated from the top university, Bilkent University in Turkey. He holds a master degree in political science at Bilkent University. He has been working for Minister of Foreign Trade for almost 15 years. And he is an expert, especially bilateral trade agreements with other countries, especially in Middle East. So thank you for coming, Adem, and floor is yours. What is the perspective of Turkey in terms of increasing trade and investment between Iran, Iraq, and Turkey? Thank you, sir.
Hocam öncelikle teşekkür ederim davetiniz için. Herkese iyi akşamlar.
Thanks very much for the invitation. Have a good evening. I would like to make a short correction regarding the CV. 15 years ago, I was working in the customs. In the recent years, there have been a lot of structural changes. In the last 1 year, I have been appointed to deal with the Turkish Ministry of Trade's relations with the other countries. But when I was working in the customs, I was focused on the entire world. But when it comes to the Iran and Iraq, approximately for 10 years, I have been studying on those two countries very intensively. The purpose of this conference, the purpose of this talk, is to analyze the opportunities and potential threats in Turkey, Iran, and Iraq relations. First of all, as Turkey, with both countries, under any conditions, we would like to advance our relations. Once upon a time, Iraq was facing the sanctions and embargoes, and we had the same policy. And in the last decade, Iran has been facing blockades and embargoes, and we keep with the same attitude of advancing our relations. As the two speakers before me mentioned, those three countries have complementary economies. Turkey is producing almost in every sector. Iran is producing, plus it has the oil. Iraq, unfortunately, as a result of the wars that it has gone through in the last 30, 40 years, because of the invasions, it has lost its own production capacity, but it has very rich resources. I'm not talking about the natural gas and oil here. In terms of the agricultural production, it has a huge potential. It has human resources, and it has a young population like Iran. Together with the cooperation of three countries, we could create an economic center in the region. An economic center. We can see this in different parts of the world. NAFTA is established by United States together with Canada and Mexico, and they are doing their best trade with with this agreement. And how did the European Union emerge? First, they have increased the trade between the neighborhood countries, and they transformed it into an economic union. But in the maybe last 100 years, we do not make any trade with our neighbors. Turkey started to change this in the last 10 years, last 15 years, and we have started seeing its impact in favor of our country and in favor of our neighbors. Turkey's Iran, Turkey's Iraq bilateral commercial volume was around $100 million in the past. But in 2012, for example, we hit the point of $20 billion. 2020 was a special year. I was aware of that. But it is saying a lot of thinks about our potential. What should we do? First, in Turkey, we have the energy problem, energy bottleneck. First, we need to buy this energy as soon as possible and put it in our industry's service. And apart from it's not possible for a country to sustain itself by only exporting oil. Iraq, apart from food and oil, it needs everything. That's why Iraq construct its own industry. It has to make investments so that it can become the wealthy country it has been in the past, so that they can lead the way for their young population. What can Turkey do? Turkey can invest in Iraq. Does Turkey want to do so? Yes, it does. Are there any obstacles? Yes, there are. First of all, the investors should be sure about not only their physical safety, but the safety of their investments. So there should be a mutual incentive and protection agreement between those two countries, so that Turkish investors should know that they are under international protection. This is also valid for Turkey-Iran relations. There were some significant investments from Turkey in Iran, but from time to time, the companies' needs were not met. Sometimes they were forced to abandon their investments, or they had some difficulties in transferring the profit that they made back in Turkey. It could be because of the international sanctions, but it could also be because of the fact that Iran wants to use its own foreign exchange, spend its own foreign exchange on some points which are considered to be urgent for the people of the country. This fact is intimidating the investors in Turkey, and this is not a positive thing for Turkey to be able to bring investment, to bring know-how and human resources in those countries. First, you need to ensure the safety of those investments. Without this security, what do? We either export goods or services. For example, we are sending $30 billion of construction services. It's good for us. Our constructors go there and build airports, housing, hospitals and schools. As a result of those investments, they make a certain profit. Both Iraq is winning and our country is winning, but it is not converted into a production in Iraq. For us to be able to make an investment that is producing something, have the necessary guarantees. The profit that could be gained should be brought back to Turkey without any obstacles. Sometimes we face the following troubles: sudden changes of legislation. Especially in the last period, the biggest problem that we have facing has been those sudden changes. What happens is that all of a sudden Iraq introduces a ban to the import of something, or they establish some new taxes. These are natural rights stemming from the sovereignty rights of the Iraq. We are not questioning that. If Iraq or Iran need such kind of sanctions or such kind of measures, they could easily do so. But the problem is that if you would like to do this overnight, I'm talking about our country as well, because if you do such kind of sudden changes, you see problems everywhere. So the merchants, the traders, commercial people face some difficulties and their distrust increase. For example, Turkey is exporting a huge amount of eggs, and all of a sudden Iraq established a ban on importing eggs from Turkey. Which means that the companies that invested on eggs in Turkey lost their huge market, and they don't know what to do with the huge amount of chickens and eggs they have. and they faced a huge bankruptcy threat. But if there was a transition period of 3 months, 6 months, it could have been possible to establish a solution, which wasn't the case. Since this hurt the confidence of the people who wanted to do trade, we are still trying to save this $25 billion, which could have been $100 billion. Because of this fact, for example, we have reductions and decreases in our trade volume, both with Iran and Iraq compared to 2017, 2018. There are some other problems. People are trying to save the day, especially when it comes to the economic relations. Let's say Iraq needs, I'm just making things up. Let's say Iraq needs detergents, washing detergents. Let's sell detergents. Let's make some investments. But Iraq may build another detergent factory tomorrow and try to meet its own needs, which is very natural. So instead of starting a new investment, a new detergent investment, maybe we can establish some partnerships. It could be a Turkey-Iraqi partnership, or Turkey-Iran partnership, or Iran-Iraqi partnership. Yes, making an investment is good, and in the short term you will win, but in the middle and long term it is ambiguous. Our friends from Iran and Iraq talked about the fact that we should undertake a quadripartite collaboration, including Syria. But in Syria, there is a difficult situation. In Syria, there is not a state that is recognized by all the parties. So at that stage, it may not be possible to organize such a quadripartite alliance. Road and Belt Initiative by China. Yes, China allocated a huge Road and Belt Initiative budget, and they are trying to reach to Europe, and they're trying to bring about an alternative to the marine paths. Is China doing this because it likes Turkey, Iran, and Pakistan and the other countries very much? No. China wants to cross all the paths with highways, with railways, through the seas, because it wants to find new targets. In Turkey, we have made some initiatives to revive the Road and Belt Initiative, but despite the fact that we wanted to have a very close cooperation with Iran, we couldn't focus on this topic. That's why we concentrated our efforts in the Caspian Sea, in the Central Asia. But we are ready to collaborate further together with Iran on this point. In the previous presentation, I have seen that the presentation was talking about 6 different border gates between Iran and Iraq. And unofficially, there are approximately 10 border gates. In Turkey, we have 5 border gates, but only 2 of them are active. I wish the others were open, and we could have diversified the paths of trade. In Iran, we have 4 gates. One of them is a railway gate, but unfortunately all the commercial relations are focused on one single gate. And whenever there is a problem at that gate, because it's in the hilltops of Ağrı, which receives a lot of snow during the winter, and it's blocked. And 90% of our trade with Iraq is focused on Habur border gate. And I know the details because I have been working on this for 10 years. We need to work hard.
Everybody needs to have goodwill, and everybody wants to be willing, otherwise it doesn't work. Concerning Turkey's trade with Iraq, actually, our guest was referring it was $1 billion, but it's around $4 billion. The figure, maybe you're going to be happy about it. So we actually buy quite a lot of petroleum from Iraq, $4 billion equivalent. So problems concerning northern Iraq are problems that the 2 states have to deal with. It's not within trade, that we have to get concerned. But personally speaking, when I started to work on Iran, I used to work at the customs office. Between Turkey and Iran, the situation was everybody was blaming the other. Nobody was trusting the other. So we have a saying, like, you have to shape it to yourself. You should get everything to yourself. It doesn't matter what the opposing party does or what the others do. So there was no progress whatsoever. In 2011, 2012, we sat down with Iranian colleagues. We said, okay, we cannot really solve our problems. We have serious problems, some of which are very simple problems with simple solutions. We cannot solve them this way. What to do? So together, we should find a win-win situation. So in the back of our minds, we shouldn't have a different agenda in the back of our minds. And after succeeding in this, we actually made a lot of progress in customs area only. I'm talking about customs area with Iran. We opened a new gate in this sense with Iran. We renewed our gate in Hakkari province. We also eliminated certain obstacles in front of trade. In the 21st century, can there be a discrepancy of shift hours? Because of this problem, our trade was almost coming to a halt between the two countries. Can you believe? You tell this to children, they will laugh. There's this technology, there are smartphones. Why can't you tackle the problem of shift hours, work hours? But we couldn't. For so many years, we couldn't because we didn't care about one another, let alone trust. So I do my own thing, let the other do whatever she wants. So now the whole geographical region is facing wars or terror or occupations. So traditionally, there are big actors in this region as countries. Turkey, Iran, Egypt, and sometimes Saudi Arabia from time to time. What do? We are fighting against one another. What kind of profit have we derived from fighting against one another? Can we really say? Do we check it as countries? We do not get any benefits. Look at the region. It is not different from the period of Crusaders. There is occupations and occupants. It looks like World War I. Economy is very important. Fine, trade is very important. Let's develop trade. But unless we understand one another and support one another, you can increase trade. Next day, some foreign power comes, occupies you. There's no trade left. For the first time, I was in Baghdad in 2015. I have been to 40 countries in the world. It was one of the saddest visits I've ever done to a country. It used to be the cradle of Islamic civilization, Baghdad. The way Baghdad looked made me so sad. I stayed in Baghdad for 2 days, but I couldn't even understand. I couldn't grasp anything. I have seen Aleppo on television, or Quds. I've been to Jerusalem. We're so happy, right? We have succeeded, right? It's all rubles everywhere, but we still keep on fighting among one another. Thank you. So there's a saying in Turkish, no country like mother, no place like Baghdad. It's very sad to see Baghdad this way. Adem, Mr. Yazıcı, has actually touched our heart, has translated, interpreted our hearts. If not politically, he did so emotionally. So in this region, so much fight. Why are we fighting so much? So we should ask ourselves, we are thinking this way, but sometimes we have to do diplomacy that we cannot deliver such emotional and honest speeches. I would like to thank Mr. Adem Yazıcı for such honest observations, sincere observations. Now Q&A session, and then we will wrap up our session, and the conference will come to an end.
Okay, so as usual, I'll be the guy that's pointing out to the room. I share with my Turkish friend his lament at the continuation of war, and I remind him and us that Europe had 2 world wars until they realized that trade is the answer and cooperation is the answer. And we are still, I think, the beginning of the awakeness is happening here. We are all agreeing that in the past 100 years we've been playing the dominance game. Iran wants to be the dominant, Turkey wants to be dominant, Saddam wants to be dominant, and everybody wanted to be dominant. And we're always talking about a zero-sum game. So we are at least recognizing that dominance is not the answer, cooperation and integration is the answer. However, the one thing that none of you talked about is for integration to really work, you need, well, you touched upon it, but you didn't point that. You need democracy and you need free market. Free market means dominance of law and predictability. You kind of touched on it, on the unpredictability of investment atmosphere in Iraq, and you're quite right. But in fact, we have a problem, a fundamental structural problem in my humble opinion. Iraq talks about a free market, Iraq's constitution talks about a free market, but in fact we're a socialist country, top down, we're a rentier state as Mr. Dagher or Dr. Dagher pointed out. Iran would like to think of itself as a free market. In reality, it's still, at least partially, they're much better than Iraq, but partially a rentier state, and maybe the embargo will help you actually become independent of the addiction to oil income. Turkey, as you point out, is without resources, but you have the most free market of us all, and you have followed the Korean model more or less, where the government actually facilitates private business. Before our complete integration happens, both Iran and Iraq have a lot to do to catch up with you. And so my question is not to you, my question is to the Iranian gentleman and to the Iraqi government, the Iraqi gentleman. How long is it going to take for both of our countries to really achieve a free market, predictable law, and true democracy?
Thank you very much for the very enlightening speeches and also very objective and scientific. I would like to talk about a topic from a different view, from a different angle. We presume that the 3 countries, Iraq, Iran, and Turkey, should have a unique relationship, a relationship that is not just based on economic or political competition, but a relationship that is also based on the fact that these are brother countries. They belong to a similar culture, religion, and maybe other ties. I'm just questioning, I mean, how is it possible to find a kind of economic relationship, not just based on a profit, but based also on ethics? I mean, there is no point in flooding the Iraqi, in this case I'm considering the Iranian way of transporting goods and commodities to the Iraqi market. There is no point in flooding the Iraqi market with cars, for example. Now we have most of the Iraqis, there is a big number of Iraqis who are taxi drivers. It is true that there is a solution for one problem, but there is another problem created by the export of the number of cars to the Iraqi market. We lost the public transformation sector. We have a crowd problem. There is a crowd in all of our cities because of this issue. And the quality of the cars that are exported to Iraq is not a good quality. We know that this hasn't to deal with the Iranian side. Maybe it is with the Iraqi corrupt businessmen. The same case with Turkey when we consider the example of eggs. I mean, these are very small projects that should be established and run by Iraqis. If we think of competing with Iraqi businessmen on the level of selling eggs or bread or yogurt, if we think of exporting our water, drinking water from our neighboring countries, then what kind of small projects will be established in Iraq? what kind of economy we are going to have. We are very happy to import all kinds of marble from Turkey because we don't have marble, but there's no point in importing drinking water or yogurt or eggs. So I think your countries also should help Iraq to run its own small projects or small businesses, because this is also going to stabilize stabilize the economy in Iraq, and also to help develop the country, and also to help the decision makers think about more strategic kind of relationships based on long-term exchange rather than these short-term exchange that can create the same problem that you talked about, my colleague, the case that happened in Turkey when the businessman lost his business because the Iraqis stopped importing eggs from him. Thank you very much.
Ben önce hepinizden
First of all, I would like to thank you all for all the presentations. I would like to thank Mr. Adem Yazıcı for his sincere remarks as well as technical remarks. I would like to ask Mr. Yazıcı, you know, Iran has been subject to President Trump's sanctions embargo. No country has accepted it. It's only the United States and Israel that accepts it. The remaining countries officially have rejected this embargo. And there are certain authorities in Turkey from the top to bottom. They have continuously declared that they reject the American embargo on Iran. But this embargo is not geared only toward Iran. It's also geared toward the trade partners of Iran. If we do not get engaged in trade with Turkey, then both Turkey and Iran is harmed from it. So, private companies are fearing the American embargo, and they do not want to do trade with Iran, the Turkish private companies. The state wants it, but the private companies are scared, and they cannot do trade with Iran. Iran has connections, and there are SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. They are active in Turkey, and Turkey is a developing country in terms of economy. So we see that the numbers of these companies are on the rise, and they are becoming more and more active. So the United States cannot have any sanctions on these companies because they do not have any properties in the United States. So what is the problem technically? We've been working on it, but de facto, we cannot do anything. So maybe making use of this common boundary by letting the SMEs active, we can maybe refresh the trade, but this does not take place, technically speaking. What would you say as an expert? I'm interested in your views on this. Any other questions? Mr. Azam.
Okay. Başka sorusu olan?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Shukran lisad.
Thank you for everyone. I would love to speak about the protection of the customs, that the protectionist method of the Iraqi government to protect its own local product. The Iraqi government is currently facing challenges, both security, political and economical ones. And there is a huge populist pressure on the government and the parliament to protect the local product. But when we talk about that Iraq is the fourth partner in the trade between in Turkey, and the size of the trade from 10 to 13 billion dollars between the two sides, and the size, the limited industrial sectors inside of Iraq, and it's dependent on its resources, and the huge unemployment in the youth. And it will be a must to protect the local product in Iraq. And as my friends here, my Turkish friend here talked about the Turkish eggs and how this trouble came to be between the two countries. I say that the Turkish side and the Iranian side should take in consideration there will be an increase in the Iraqi production, gradual increase. And they will have to take in consideration that the Iraqi government will take measures to protect its local produce, like oils, chicken, wheat, and flour. And we are currently we're importing flour from Turkey a lot, but now we're looking forward not to. But and it is possible that the Iraqi government will impose this certain limitations on the Turkish flour. The same thing will go on for the Iranian gas. In the 2020, the price of the Iranian gas the prices will rise, and the current production of Iraqi gas production with the new the gas well that is going to open, it's going to be self-sufficient of the gas, and that will let the Iranian and the Turkish produce of the gas. That will change the balance of the energy distribution in the region. We are already currently dealing with the problems from Iraq. Now we are having, if the Iranians are complaining about the U.S. sanctions, we have a very much problem right now that we are facing. That it is how to create the balance and how to support the Turkish market and the Turkish market to be able to produce. And now my question is, do you have a database that is trying to map the economical map in the Iraq, and not to be able to expect the decision that is relevant to the protectionist laws that are being taken in consideration in Iraq?
Presentation.
If no further questions, then I would now give the floor to Mr. Zengane, then Mr. Dager, and then Mr. Yazıcı.
شكرا سيد الرئيس وشكرا.
Thank you all for Mr. President, and thank you for everyone's comments. The main point that has been mentioned by Mr. Azam is a major one, which is the societal transition is not only coming as a concern, and when it is coming in the political and democratic issues, even if in the economical issues. And as you have said that the current sanctions on Iran that helped Iran to get rid of its dependence on the oil exports, 50% of its oil exports, and it developed its methods and developed its economy by with a good percentage, and there is a very great direction towards the information technology. and making benefit of creating companies based on the startups concepts and creating jobs for the youth. Till now, there have been 3,000 companies that have been established from fresh graduates and young men that are having a lot of backgrounds in information technologies. Side to side to the direction in the production of producing products using nanotechnology. The added value that is being gained by nanotechnology, it cannot be compared with any added value. 1 meter of petrol or gas, you can make $20,000 as a return without major machinery or major tools, and it doesn't need the government. And that is a very important element to create a base, a societal base, an economical base, a new one, which will create and it will create a new dynamics in the social and political change. For the concept that have been mentioned by Dr. Dia, there has been a point that we have in common. There is supply and demand. Who demands cheap cars? I don't know how much dollars or Saipa. Saipa cars are basically Korean cars used by Iran for the poor sectors, the poor segments of society. Then it has been moved to Iraq. Who creates this demand? And now you are at the tuk-tuk and other means of transportation in Iraq. Why did the society is demanding cheaper and lower quality cars? Due to the harsh economical situation. Adding to that, the merchant or the businessman or the tradesman is always looking for a cheaper goods because the market behind him is demanding of cheaper goods. The way more important point is the relation between Iraq and Iran, Iraq and Turkey is bilateral, is one-sided. It's about the economical issue. For the economical issue, both of them are focusing on just sell the goods and go, and this transaction is wrong. And that made both the Turkish and Irani tradesmen to have a very fast daily transactions and deals. This only benefits a very specific segment, which are businessmen and tradesmen, and trade has its own laws and regulations. And trade cannot be successful if it has no competition. If you have competitive products, you will be able to. It will already repel the foreign products. The other important point, we have to together as to our tradesmen, our products, our businessmen to become partners in our industry, in our factories, without producing these producing all our products in Turkey or Iran. We could just return these industries back or inside of Iraq I could pass on the technology and the expertise, and I could use the Iraqi and the local labor. And at this point, the economic relation is gonna be strengthened, and this will enforce and this will tighten and strengthen the political relation.
The response from the audience covered many things, and I not need to comment also. And thanks to the Turkey representative for his warm speech. He pulled me to 25 years ago when I'm youth. I spoke like him. It's very warm, exciting, and at least we are looking forward to the future. Turkey, with this huge economy, have a good possibility to invest and to export, especially in the technical sector, in the industry, and big industry, not light industry like dairy or chicken or something like this. We depend on Turkish assistance and material to build or rebuild our industry in Iraq. And Iraq with strong economics is better for Turkish and for Iran than a weak one. When you are speak about the tariff, I don't stand a lot on the exchange rate. Do you know, we are so suffer from the depreciation. But this is not a problem. We could pass it, and we could make harmonization between both teams toward the future. The future is the important, and I think when we speak about the difficulties, not to stop on, but to look forward the future. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tucker. And Adem, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. There were two questions expecting answers from me. How can we continue trading after the embargo against Iran? We don't recognize this embargo as the Turkish state, but because of the international trade relations of the private companies in Turkey, they may not want to involve in trade with Iran, and we can't say anything against them. But we can do the following. There's the following situation. If you're trading via dollar, if you're using dollars, all the dollar transfers should be approved by New York. And if you're using euro, it should be approved by the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. If we do this in Turkish liras, then we wouldn't experience any problems. As you said, the SMEs could do that, but as you said, if they have some trade relations with Europe or United States, they are somewhat hesitant to do so. As you know, via Halkbank of Turkey, we have provided technical support and we have acted as mediators. Among them, there were some American companies and European companies, which means that European and American companies were undertaking some commercial activities with Iran via Turkey, but nowadays they started to have some problems because Iranian money accumulated in Turkey could only finance the Iranian investments, and we have dealt with the issue in all the meetings with Iran. Iranian side accepted this. The staple goods, food and medicine needs could be covered by using this money. This was the agreement. So other sectors are left around. So if some other commercial activities other than this are going to be undertaken, then we can use some other exchanges. Rather than trying to sell eggs, rather than trying to trade chickens and having this short-term perspective, I believe that we need to have some collaboration activities with the perspective of the long term. But I also reiterated that Iraqi government has the full rights to apply tariffs. Iraqi government can take the necessary measures because the unemployment is a severe issue in Iraq. But we want to be notified beforehand so that our business necessary measures, because by selling ice creams, by selling eggs, we cannot go anywhere. We need to invest in high-tech products in Turkey, in Iraq. Turkey was selling cement, a significant amount of cement to Iraq, but after the establishment of the cement factories, we don't sell cement anymore. We don't sell concrete anymore. Of course, we would like to support Iraq in making investments on their own, but for the Turkish investors to be able to invest in Iraq, they need to feel confident. It is valid for Iraq, it is valid for any country. If they don't have some strong basis, strong guarantees, they wouldn't want to go. Turkish traders, Turkish businessmen used to go to places where the other investors were not very willing to do so. And they're still very willing to go to those corners of the world, but we need to have the legal infrastructure to be able to do so. And we all know the sensitivities, Iraqi sensitivities on water. We understand the situation of Iraq, but you need to distinguish between the commercial issues and water. At least a part of them should be put aside so that we can advance in some certain areas. Thanks very much. I would like to thank all the participants, especially for their explanations about the commercial activities. I would like to thank all the participants and guests from Iran, Azerbaijan, Afghanistan. Thanks very much. I would like to thank Iranian Studies Center and whoever made an effort in organizing this symposium. Thanks very much, guys. Thanks very much for staying here up until the late hours of the evening. You, dear audience, thanks very much. Hope to see you in another event of Iranian Studies Center. Have a good evening, have a good day. Thanks very much.